Members, I have to apologize. I don't want to spread the germs to the secretariat. We have formed a quorum. It's also the appointed time. May I call the meeting to order? Please invite the administration and also deputations to come in now.
我睇緊邊張啊？你俾我嗰沓嘢，俾我嗰沓唔係呢一張，OK，得一張，冇咗，都冇喎，大家睇啊，即係佢哋坐定定，我讀呢行嘅喎。
While the deputations are coming in and while we're waiting for the administration to be seated, may I inform members that on the 4th of December, the Secretariat issued an invitation on our website for members of the public to attend our public hearing or to give us written submissions. The response have been very overwhelming. Since the invitation was issued, the Secretariat has received in total 184 applications. Since we've only got 3.5 hours scheduled for this morning, we could only invite the first 60 deputations or individuals to attend the hearing today. So the Bills Committee will receive views from the public on the bill, and then we'll invite the administration to respond. And if there is still time left, I will allow members to ask questions. And for the 100-odd deputations or individuals who have registered to come, the Secretariat is now arranging another date and time to attend another public hearing and will inform them of the details ASAP. I'd like to welcome the deputations and also representatives from the government to the meeting. May I remind deputations present that if need be, you can tune into the channel you prefer on the earpiece. Channel 1 is Cantonese, Channel 2 English, and Channel 3 Putonghua. And please note the guide for members of the public attending meetings in the council building already tabled on the security measures. And members of the public in attendance can also approach our secretariat staff for a copy. And let me remind deputations and individuals present that your remarks and written submissions will not be protected by the Electoral Powers and Privileges Ordinance. Because of time constraints, may I remind you that you have each up to 3 minutes to speak. So please be succinct in your remarks, and when the alarm rings, please stop your speech, and please refrain from using cocktail language so for the sake of the simultaneous interpreters. So I will now invite the deputations and individuals to speak, and the name list is already attached to Appendix 1. As I said, after deputations have spoken, I will give the floor to the administration, and then, if there is still time left, members of the Bills Committee can ask questions. All right. The first one on the list is from Yau Chi Mong District Council. The representative is yet to arrive. Second, Mr. Wong Wai Lun. Thank you. The administration is proposing a pilot scheme by means of public tendering. There will be 3 franchises, and each can operate 200 franchise taxis. And the term is for 5 years, and there can be no renewal or transfer of franchise. I think ordinary taxi licenses should be allowed to enjoy the trial. There's been no public consultation, and the industry has only been informed. In 2015, it was said that through a new licensing system, quality taxi services will be introduced, and the original 18,000 original taxi licenses will be retained, and then quality taxi licenses will be introduced. There was a consultation of the industry. However, there is no alternative in the bill. So the industry is just informed. There is no public consultation, and their interest has been jeopardized. There is nothing in the bill to enhance the quality of taxi services. It will only lead to a shortage of manpower, and there will be unnecessary competition between quality taxis and ordinary taxis. We are of the view that this will affect the business of the ordinary taxis. And has been proposed that some of the licenses can be switched to provide premium taxis. Although taxi services are frequently criticized, there will be, under this scheme, there will be some restriction on the on taxi services. Now, franchise taxis cannot really provide the services expected, and the requirements are too complex, and also the tendering exercise will be complex, and we cannot satisfy the demand of ordinary commuters, and members of the public cannot tell the difference between a franchise taxi and an ordinary taxi. And if the fee is to be determined by the tenderers, then we should not ensure that we should not mandate that the franchise taxi fares should be 50% higher than the ordinary taxis. Now, because of protests and also clashes and a reduction in visitors to Hong Kong, many taxis are not viable. And the franchise taxis will do a blow to the current taxis. And there will be if there are an additional 600 franchise taxis, then the whole industry will be affected. Thank you. Ms. Leung Shuk Yin, founder of Diamond Taxi. Thank you. I find it strange to be here because I'm a layman, and 10 years ago I wasn't in the industry because I saw that taxis were not accessible to wheelchair users, so I started the Diamond Taxi services. I have seen a lot of improvement in the industry. They want to enhance their quality of service, and they have different modes of operation. Now, I provide taxi services for wheelchair users. Our capacity to expand is very limited because of the car make, and we want to have different car makes for wheelchair users, but choice is limited. If we can have more diversity in taxi services, if there can be more choice in taxi make, then the manufacturers will see market potential, and there will be more car makes for us to choose. My company mainly serves wheelchair users. And we need safety and efficiency, because for 99% of our business, we serve wheelchair users. If there is so limited choice in car make, then it is difficult for us to expand. By 2030, over 20% of our population will be over 60 years old. And how do we tackle the problem of an aging population? As we all know, we have got new taxis available, but very few people would use that for wheelchair users, because the alighting and embarking is very complicated, and we have to take up an extra lane, so it's not convenient to use. It's because the market is not diversified enough, and therefore we don't have a lot of choice in car models. Now, under the bill, there will be franchise taxis. I think the industry will see that as a major competition. I have no strong views. I just want to have more car make choices available for taxi users. Now, if this policy can encourage more taxi models to come in, I encourage that. However, I have to stress that I'm a layman. If we do not have the software, i.e. drivers, then if we do not have enough manpower in the industry, then it's pointless to talk about the policy. The whole industry require resources to nurture and manpowers and service people.
下一位
Thank you. Next, we have Mr. Wong Lap Kay. Good morning. I'm a bit feeling unwell, so I'll be brief. We already have a shortage of drivers, and the drivers are getting old in age, and the drivers the income for taxi drivers are also rather unstable. I therefore object to this bill. Next, we have Mr. Chen Chi Nam. Good morning, Chairman. I am the representative of the Urban Taxi Association. Taxi drivers now, we already have a shortage of taxi drivers, and the drivers are getting old. A conservative estimate is that we already have a shortfall of driver for the day shift, and the situation is even worse for the night shift. If the government is to increase the number of franchise buses by 600, we're going to need more than 1,000 more drivers, and there will be a more result. This will result in more serious shortage. The business for taxis are shrinking. In 1997, the daily turnover was 1.3 million. Now it's only 0.9 million. You also have, private hire cars and Ubers encroaching on the business, and the government is still increasing the number of franchise buses. Then I think our business will be severely, jeopardized. Next, we have Mr. Ip Kok Wah. Thank you. Good morning. I would like to protest that the government is now proposing to launch franchise buses, the rationale being that, according to the bill, they are not able to regulate the quality of taxi drivers and the quality of the taxi owners, and it's difficult for the government to amend the regulations, and therefore it would be difficult to improve the quality of taxi service, and hence we need to introduce franchise taxis. And the government is going to drastically amend the taxi regulations. Over the past 3 decades, the government have not been claimed that it had not been able to amend the regulation. If that's the case, does that mean that the taxi trade would have to change itself? When the government is not going to help us. Right now, the government is proposing to amend the regulation in order to introduce the franchise taxis. Why is it that the government cannot amend the existing regulation? This is unfair, because in our business, many stakeholders are now attempting to change, and we hope that the government will give us some room so that we can improve, ourselves. government should not, introduce an extra 600 taxis. And if they prove to be unviable in 5 years' time, what's going to happen? Why doesn't the government try to resolve the problem that our industry is facing, and instead is introducing something new that would really, obstruct the way that our industry is trying to improve? Next, we have Mr. Wong Yu King. Thank you. Over the last 5 years, in fact, in 2014, the government introduced Uber into Hong Kong, and all of us are now being severely hit, and we haven't yet recovered from that yet. And the problem is getting even worse. Recently, our business is dwindling, and few people want to join the trade. The government and the THB is actually proposing to introduce 600 franchise buses. Passengers are already dropping in numbers. Drivers are unwilling to join the trade. The government's not tackling the illegal hire cars, and they are actually hitting out at the legitimate taxi operations. We have those who are violating the law are continuing to do the business, while we are operating legitimately. Our business is shrinking. And as a result, we now have ended up in the present situation. I hope the government will really, first of all, improve the service of existing taxi drivers and their incomes. If taxi drivers' attitudes are not good, then the government can resort to persuasion and regulation and reduce the number of these, unscrupulous drivers, rather than introducing, allowing illegal hire cars to actually, compete for our business. The government should be people-focused and withdraw the proposed launch of the 600 franchise buses. Next, Mr. Wang Chiping. Thank you. I don't think the government should not launch the franchise buses. I agree with the other, fellow delegates that indeed many taxis are not being, hired because of a shortage of drivers. This could be due to the fact that the threshold for, taxi driver license is very high. And also, you will now have Uber and GoGo van, which are encroaching on our business. If the government were to launch the franchise buses, I don't think the market can accommodate that. And in the end, everybody in the business will not be able to make a viable living. Next. The Kawai Motor Company. Thank you, Chairman. And I'd like to thank you for allowing me to express my objection to the proposed, franchise buses. According to a recent survey, the taxi service in Hong Kong, I think the taxi, quality has been steadily improving. Why is it that while we're now making improvements and improving the quality of our service, the government still insists on launching the 600 franchise buses, claiming that it can improve taxi quality, service quality? I really doubt that. And also, many people in the taxi trade have already said that we are still not able to resolve the problem of labor shortage in our industry. If we were to introduce import labor, such drivers may not be familiar with the road condition. The income of taxi drivers are not competitive in the labor market. If the government still adopt a conservative attitude when taxi drivers apply for an adjustment to their fares, I don't think we'll be able to survive, and we won't be able to attract new blood to join our industry. Finally, in the proposed scheme for franchise buses, the government stressed that the new fares for franchise buses should be 50% above those of the ordinary taxis, and that as a result, quality could improve. If money can solve all problems, why doesn't the government simply raise the fares for ordinary taxis by 50%. And then I'm sure the quality service will certainly improve, and the government would not need to waste so much manpower and resources to introduce these franchise buses. Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Wong. Next, we have Mr. Chen Wai-ming. Thank you. I am the principal of Sun Sing Taxi Motor Company. I've been in the business for 3 decades. Since last year, I have never seen our business, doing so badly now, and the government is now proposing to launch another 600 franchise buses. The government is actually ignoring whether we can survive or not, and the industry is now suffering such severe blow. Many taxis are not hired, many taxi drivers are not able to make a living, and the government is now proposing to add another 600 taxis in the market. Shouldn't the government instead consider how they can improve our livelihood instead? The government, regarding the illegal hire cars, which are now encroaching on our business, the problem is rampant, but the government is not, seriously tackling these illegal hire cars, and is proposing to launch 600 franchise taxis instead. I therefore hope the government will immediately scrap the proposed franchise taxi scheme, and also tackle the illegal hire cars. Next, Mr. Lee Siu Pan. Thank you, Chairman. I represent the Sai Kung Taxi Association. First of all, our association strongly objects to the government for launching the proposed franchise taxi scheme without consulting the taxi trade. On the one hand, the government is saying that it is not able to regulate the operations of ordinary taxis. We strongly object to that. In fact, in terms of the regulation of taxis, the regulation is very stringent. For example, there are restrictions on the type of vehicles we can use, our fares, and application for fare adjustments. We applied for fare adjustments last year, and the application is yet to be approved. Adjusting fares means increasing incomes for the drivers. And it takes at least 2 years before taxi drivers can have the incomes raised. I want members to consider how we are able to make a living. I hope the members will really support us in our application for fare adjustments. Regarding compartment facilities, the government is increasing all kinds of new restrictions. For example, the requirement for us to issue receipts, braille, signs, and also require us to change the type of vehicles we operate. The government certainly had the ability to implement these changes. All these compartment facilities have to be paid for by the owner, but the trade always comply with the government's requirements in order to improve the quality of our service, so that we can better serve our passengers. At the moment, we already have professional taxi fleet management, and we already provide diversified services. The government should play the lead and the system, so that in the end, all taxis in Hong Kong can offer quality service, rather than just having those 600 franchise taxis doing that. I think we should first of all let the taxi industry, try first to improve its taxi, quality, and also the government should scrap the scheme for franchise taxis. Mr. Chow Kai-wing. Good morning. I'm Chow Kai-wing. I'm a taxi owner and a driver myself. I've been a driver more than 20 years. After the SARS epidemic and the financial crisis, but over the last few years, our business has been really eroded by the illegal hire cars. The government is not making attempts to resolve the problem, and it's introducing requirements like electronic, road pricing and so on, all adding to our burden. Take ERP, for example. I need to install, a telephone with such functions, and the government does not consider whether we would need to adjust our fares to comply with that. on the roads, we are already subject to all kinds of regulations. We need to have annual motor inspection and so on. And the government is now proposing to launch another 600 franchise taxes. The government's not heeding to the problems that we are facing. The government's not talking to us and taking into consideration the problems that we face. For example, our fares may need to be adjusted. The government is not willing to listen and is not giving us a chance to improve, and instead is increasing the number of taxis by 600. And that is not really helping us at all. When there are road congestions, I think the government is saying that there's nothing they can do to resolve the problem. And now all of a sudden the government is launching the franchise taxes, and that is really, hurting the industry. Thank you. Mr. Wong Po Keung. Good morning.
And members of the Bills Committee, good morning. I'm of the view that the administration should withdraw the proposal on franchised taxis and should help the industry to improve its quality of service and operating environment, to enhance the income of taxi drivers, to attract new blood to join the taxi industry. Illegal hire cars have not just taken away business from us, and because of the government's condonings, and I think they are encouraging them to do business illegally. The government should crack down on illegal hire cars, seize their cars, and penalize the drivers. The government has not responded to our proposals to improve the operating environment of the taxi. In September 2018, we applied for taxi fares to be increased, and it's been more than a year, but we haven't heard anything yet. And for 3 years, our fares have not been increased, whereas there has been inflation and rise in insurance premium, as well as higher fees. So the government should set a priority right. You should first deal with the problem of shortage of manpower and attract more young people to become drivers so that we can improve our services. Our taxi fleet can provide the requirements of franchised taxis. For instance, we have the Diamond Cab. They can provide all the requirements of the government. Yet, the government doesn't allow the current ordinary taxi fleet to try. And on the contrary, it is introducing 600 franchised taxis. Why do you think that service quality can be improved by making the taxi fare 50% higher than the current fares? We have more than 40,000 taxi drivers representing 40,000 families. Why don't you give us help first? And we cannot cope with new technologies, so we want the government to help us in terms of using innovation and technology. Thank you. Mr. Zhang Chi-Kwan. Good morning, Chairman. Chairman, members of the legislature and officials, I am a small investor in taxis. I have been in the industry for decades. I have been conscientious and hardworking. This morning, I parked my car at a car park, hoping to come here to hear from the administration proposals to help the industry to develop. Unfortunately, it is exactly the opposite. We have seen commissioning of new railway lines, and our patronage is shrinking. the government has no regard for the viability of the industry. By introducing franchise taxis, it will take away the high spending commuters from us. You have to remember that taxi licenses is an investment too as well. At license costs over $6 million now. And the government has collected license fees from us. Now it wants to change the system by introducing a new type of taxi. This is so unfair to existing taxis. This will be a precedent. New taxi licenses may be introduced. So will people be willing to invest in taxi licenses? And if there is no prospect in this career, how are young people going to join this industry? The taxi drivers will become not so dedicated to their job. Over 20% of the taxis cannot find a driver for the evening shift. The government is turning its axe towards the industry so as to gain popularity among the people. We're very angry with the current system. Now, if you think that the current system is wrong, then you should compensate license holders for their loss. More than 20 years ago, billions of people were given, money was given to Hong Kong Telecom, and for the poultry traders, you compensated them tens of thousands of dollars, although they were not required to get any license. So there are so many hire cars available in the streets, and that the government has not enforced its requirements. So we're strongly against the franchised taxi proposals. I hope members can help us to oppose this unjust bill, because this bill will only force us to take to the streets to protest. Ms. Van Shai Kong. Thank you. Good morning. I've been in the taxi industry for decades. I think many speakers have already talked about the problems of the trade. Now, I'd like to ask whether the government wants to be accused of colluding with the business sector. Now, there will be 600 franchise taxis with higher fares, and you say that in return, commuters can get reasonable fares. Then why should taxi drivers charge according to the meter charge? And I think this is very unfair. In the past, when people asked me what I did for a living, I would proudly say that I'm a taxi driver. And if people ask me what kind of a taxi I drive, and if it is not a franchised taxi, that means the taxi will be of inferior quality. How would I have the face to tell people that I'm a taxi driver in the future? And we used to have light goods vehicles and passenger vans. When we met with the administration, we raised these issues. However, they had fallen on deaf ears. So what's the point of introducing 600 franchised taxis? Who will be the future operators? And that is unfair to our trade. Thank you. Thank you. Mr. Cheng Yun Yao. Thank you, Chairman. I represent the Cyclone taxi fleet. If the administration wants to improve taxi services, it should relax its requirements on vehicle types and also remove the restricted zones so that we can have a bigger patronage, and we can have more income. You should have introduced a new type of taxi. As we all know, roads in Hong Kong are very congested. Another 600 taxis on the road will further burden our road service, causing more congestion. This will hasten the brain drain of taxi drivers. So I urge the withdrawal of the proposal. Mr. Wong Shui Keung. So the speakers have already expressed all I want to say. Given the current situation, is it really necessary to introduce another 600 franchised buses? I have nothing more to say. Mr. Yu Lau, we're from the General Association of Taxi Drivers. In 2014, Uber came to Hong Kong, and now you can easily hire a car. As at January 2019, we have submitted 800 cases, and only one of them have a hire license. There are so many hire cars, illegal hire cars, making it very difficult for taxis to operate. And if the government doesn't crack down on illegal hire cars, there is nothing we can do. We've complained to the police, and they could not be successfully prosecuted because under Cap 374, there is a time limit for prosecution, and which is half a year. Uber has been using legal loopholes. They refused to provide information required by the police. And if the law is not amended, then we cannot prosecute those Uber drivers. I am now frequently attending court hearings, and when defendant is asked to provide information, then they just pass the buck to another person, and very soon half a year would go by. Taxi drivers have been operating for a long time, and yet these illegal hire cars are competing with us. Well, at the airport car park, there are so many illegal hire cars. How can you expect the red, green, and blue taxis to compete with them? I hope the another secretary can be sympathetic and give us a hand, and please make it possible for us to survive, because taxi drivers are very unhappy with the government. Thank you. Mr. Wong Tek Ming. Thank you. I'd like to know whether the administration is really sympathetic to our plight before introducing this new bill, because it used to be 30 minutes for us to travel from NT to the urban areas, but now the time has increased to 45 minutes. Now, do you know how long are we usually stuck in the road in just flag 4? And I live in the NT. From the congestion starts from Sha Tin to Ma'an Shan to Tai Po, and perhaps it may spread to Fanling. There will be 600 franchised taxis. That means another 600 on the road, and the only party to benefit will be the 600 franchised taxi passengers. The current road system cannot support more taxis. In fact, there are sufficient taxis available. It's just that there is too much congestion and the turnaround time is too long. And passengers complain that they cannot hire a taxi, and the responsibility is pushed to taxi drivers. So I hope you can think twice about the franchised taxis. Mr. Wang Xingfat, thank you. I am a taxi driver. I don't want taxis to be labeled by the administration. Do not make a distinction between franchised taxis and ordinary taxis. Now, if they are franchised taxis providing premium service, then what are we? I hope that all taxis can be called franchised or premium taxis. Thank you. I've been in the trade for more than 30 years. I live in the NT, and every morning there is traffic congestion with another 600 taxis. I don't know whether congestion will start at 6:30. I think the government has taken the lead to polarize the community. That's all I have to say. Mr. Chen Kai-shing. Good morning. Now, for Annex 3 of the bill, Mr. Charles Mock said that our quality of service is inferior and we're using the license as an investment too. All right. Now, I agree that there are black apples in our industry. They may abuse. They may be some irregularities. However, for one court at the Peak Tram station, the fine was only $3,000. Now, I own a taxi myself. I have vested interest, and I accept online hailing, and I think it is good to have WeChat and also pay me for service. However, this has attracted other illegal hire cars to join the trade.
Members can help us, return to the right track and regulate such online car hailing, because online hailing can help us improve the quality of the service. Instead of accusing us and launching 600 new taxis onto the road, I think the government should try to improve the online car hailing system so that we can actually, operate, properly, instead of, launching 600 new taxis onto the road. LegCo has convened so many meetings, and yet you have yet to elect a chairman for the committee. So the people are already very, very disappointed. Mr. Otatik, thank you. I'm a taxi driver. I've been in the business for 30 years. 30 years ago, the road condition in Hong Kong and the traffic condition is so different from now, which is so congested. I also live in the New Territories. In the old days, I started working at 6 or 7. Now I have to wake up at 3 to 4 in the morning because of the road congestion. Launching another 600 taxis in a row, I don't know how they're going to move on the roads. I strongly object to the government's proposal. Furthermore, we are having more and more Uber cars along the taxi stands. You have all the Uber cars, waiting to pick up passengers. With the Uber cars, and if anybody can operate a Uber car, I've seen young, women who with driving licenses who are in their 20s can already operate a Uber, online, hiring service. Even if you arrest one of Uber drivers, the penalty is too small. I think you should confiscate the car and suspend the license instead. Thank you. Mr. Kok Yek Hung, good morning. I believe that all the taxi operators here know that for the 1,800 taxis in Hong Kong, they are subject to very stringent regulations in terms of the type of vehicles, the fuels, the fares, number of passengers we can carry, and the requirement for motor inspection every 6 months. Few years ago, a company bypassed all the regulations and launched a new type of, operation. And passengers really welcome that because because they don't care so long as these vehicles can take them to their destinations. After a few years, the government is now, coming up with a sort of a new proposal which would actually supersede the ordinary taxis. We are already facing unfair competition, for example, illegal motor vans and hire cars, picking up passengers. So we are already operating in a very difficult environment. And the government, and now we have to face this, the fact that the government is legitimizing such unfair competition. And I don't think the people in the taxi industry will accept that. I think the government should really reconsider and listen to the views of the industry. I'm sure we would welcome fair competition, but if there is unfair competition, we would strongly object to that. Thank you. Madam Lordship Fund. Good morning, Chairman. I represent the Hong Kong and Kowloon Taxi Hire Association. Many of my peers already raised objection to the government's launching 600 franchise taxis. Among the 600 franchise taxis, the government claims that I think this is unfair to the 18,000 taxi owners. The government's proposed policy is not relieving the burden of the public. Instead, it is adding to the difficulties faced by the taxi industry. The government's not helping the industry to improve the quality of the service up to the government's expectation. Instead, the government is adopting unfair and unjust policies to actually, suppress the taxi operators. For the taxi operators, according to the government's paper, the government talks about online hailing and the need to regulate taxi drivers. In fact, over the last few years, we have been doing a bit of soul searching, and we have already been making some of the improvements that you mentioned in your paper, other than the type of vehicles that we can run on the road, which is subject to government regulation, and there's nothing we can do about it. For the other requirements like electronic payment and online hailing, we are already doing that. And that's why in previous meetings when we met with government officials, we already asked why the government will not allow the 18,000 ordinary taxis and the drivers to upgrade their service so that we can begin with a pilot. You're talking about a pilot scheme now. If the pilot scheme should fail, what are you going to do? The 18,000 taxi drivers have already been subject to your tests or pilots and are now dead. The people of Hong Kong are not asking some of the taxis to offer quality service, but instead all taxis should offer quality service. Why is the government not responding to people's expectations? And instead, only try to resolve the problem by launching a small number of franchise buses. So I don't think that will really meet the expectation of the public. The public is not asking for 600 additional taxis. They want 18,000 taxis offering quality service. We are willing to be subject to government regulation. If you say the regulation right now is not enough, then we can talk to the government as to how we can further regulate the industry. Thank you. Thank you. Mr. Ng Hoi Shan. Good morning. The government is now proposing to launch franchise buses, claiming that it can help improve taxi service. And the government proposed to launch 600 such taxis, and I wonder whether this will be effective. The industry has been trying hard to improve its service. 3 years ago, we launched a quality taxi service scheme, and we also launched taxi, hire mobile apps in order to improve our efficiency. What the but there's what the industry can do is limited. We need the government's, support. For example, in terms of the types of vehicles, something because of the regulations on our fares and the requirement to use specific fuels, so we are not able to respond to the people's expectations to use better quality vehicles. Regarding fare adjustments, very often it takes a year or even longer than that. Every time before we have a fare adjustments, we would encounter inflation. How can we attract new blood to join the industry and thus improve quality? The government is, I think recently there have been increased the number of new vehicles onto the road. For example, for light vans, the number has gone up to 70,000 already. Part of the reason for that is because of the illegal hire cars operating on our roads. Because of the increase in the number of vehicles, our roads are so congested, and more locations are subject to traffic congestion and thus affecting taxi quality. We can expect that our economy will be, going downhill. Launching 600 new taxis will certainly harm the taxi industry. If the government wants to improve taxi service, it should actually cut the red tape rather than actually, adding further burden to the taxi industry. Mr. Taiping, thank you. Right now, we have so much social disturbance. The economy is in decline, and we are facing an economic recession. I have never seen such, harsh times in Hong Kong. Given that unemployment rate is now shooting up and more businesses are closing down, under the circumstances, with tourist numbers falling, people they're not going out, and people are losing the jobs and dare not spend. And yet the government is proposing to launch a different type of more expensive taxis. This is totally impractical. I hope the government will, put a stop to this proposal. We hope that the government can help us by actually, making a better pie. Instead, the government is actually introducing new competitors to take away our business. We are already struggling, and the government is still doing this. So I think the government is actually not really, fixing the problem. We are already starving, and you want us to slim. So I think what the industry really needs is that we need to have new blood. I think actually enhancing the taxi driver examination is the right move. But these 600 franchise taxis, given that we already have a severe labor shortage, you will be taking away 1,500 of our experienced drivers from the industry. So we have an enhanced, taxi license examination scheme. How can the government encourage people to apply for the taxi license? Even if you obtain a license, even if you grant more licenses, if people don't want to join the taxi industry, it's not going to help. I think in the end you will have to, increase the income for taxi drivers. Only when there is new blood can the industry offer quality service. I don't think government can simply propose to add 600 roads onto the roads. 600 versus 1,800 is only a small percentage. As Ms. Law said, what the people really want is 18,000 quality taxis rather than just 600. 600 is a very small number. The government, I think the government should wait until the economy is recovering and when we have restored social order. But before that happens, perhaps the present term of the administration would already have expired. It could perhaps perhaps for the next administration to think about this proposal. Chairman, many of my peers have already spoken, but as an employee, I also hope that the industry can improve so that we still object to the proposed franchise taxi scheme. The bill says that there will be 600 new franchise licenses will issue once every 5 years, and hence we can improve taxi quality. Looking at the statistics, we now have 18,000 taxis. The franchise, taxis only make up less than 3.3%, and people know that you need a sufficient market share before you can improve the market situation. Only then can we be competitive vis-a-vis similar products. You cannot have a few conscientious policemen to remove the bad reputation of the bad cops. So has the government really conducted any studies? People are not satisfied with taxi service, and what is the reason for that? I can tell my peers that every year, by attracting new blood in the industry in order to improve quality service, but you still have people overcharging people. Recently, a taxi driver charged somebody $1,000 going from Mong Kok to Yuen Long. So the taxi quality is falling behind the people's expectation. And also the flat fare of $36. Can that really help improve quality service? In the end, the people would rather, prefer time to money. So asking the people to adapt a flat fare of $36, is that really reasonable? People are not happy with the taxi service because of taxi, drivers overcharging them, or is it because of other reasons? I think the problem is with the taxi fare prices. The government is not going to issue new taxi license. A license is now the price of a taxi license is up to $6 million, and for the taxi drivers who have to work very hard to recover the taxi license that they pay for. So instead, they would therefore, refuse to take passengers across the harbour. If the fare is $29 and you pay them $30, they will not give you the change. So they will have to work very hard to actually recoup the tech license, the price for which they pay for the license. So all that will not really help improve the people's impression. Given the present situation, the government should really buy back all the taxi licenses. Either the government should increase the competitive with the taxi drivers. The franchise taxis, I think, will end up in a situation as ordinary taxis. So I think what the government should consider should allow industry to collaborate in order to enhance competitiveness. Otherwise, the government will not be able to actually, improve the situation. Mr. Lee, thank you. We understand that the franchise taxis bill is the right move, or the move in the right direction. But I think the bill should be improved. First of all, we understand that the taxi industry is facing many risks. First of all, the drivers are very often being criticized by passengers. Sometimes are being robbed, or they may also be hit by bacteria and viruses, and they may also need to carry people who are drunk. As a result, taxi drivers are not willing to pick up some passengers, some kind of passengers. There is also a serious labor shortage for the industry, and for the operators, this is a problem they face. If they want to enact the bill, it will affect the interests of the existing car owners and the drivers. It would also affect the interests of the potential investors because of the price of the taxi license. If we're going to launch additional franchise taxis, then there will be more competition in the market and more taxis on the roads, and the existing operators will be subject to challenge. Hong Kong is now facing a very unfavorable economic climate. I hope the government will make some adjustments. Reading the bill carefully, one can see that the threshold for the operator is that they should have a minimum capital of 50 million. I think that is excessive. If the government really wants to implement this pilot scheme, while we object to that, but if we insist, then I think 5 million will be a more reasonable threshold.
You are proposing 3 franchises. Now, if I think you should make it 600 franchises for 600 operators to operate to make it more viable. And the term is 5 years. I don't think banks are willing to provide assistance in terms of loans. They're of the view that there should at least be the vehicle age should be about 25 in order to be workable. And you should raise the status of taxi drivers so that they can have better quality of life. For instance, there should be annual dinners and handing out of cash coupons. And for ordinary taxi drivers and owners, there should be a club and with facilities to improve the quality of life of taxi drivers and their families. Thank you. Mr. Chen Hon Sing. Thank you. I own a taxi myself. I think the last few years have been the most difficult times, and taxi drivers are aggrieved. Another 600 franchise taxis will rub salt on their wound. And we do not have sufficient backup in terms of LPG refilling stations, and franchised bus services and railway services are expanding very rapidly. In November 1984, there was a major strike of taxi drivers because the Secretary for Transport back then paid no heed to our views. They thought that taxi drivers would not go on strike because we all had to make a living, and that turned out to make headlines in world news. So I hope this will not happen again. Now, imagine if we were successful in introducing franchise taxis, would situation be improved now? Now we have to consider taxi drivers, and they are human beings, and so are passengers. So whenever there are human beings, there will be difficulties, no matter how good your system is. There is no guarantee that there is no argument between the taxi driver and passenger. Now, if the meter fare starts from $36, does that mean that the service will improve? Not necessarily. The bill intends to improve taxi services and not to polarize the industry. However, the 600 franchised taxis will polarize the industry. Let's look at the patronage. I think the highest patronage appear at peak times, and after that you can see taxis are queuing up waiting for hire, and we're in dire situation already. The government said that high-spending customers can have access to improved services provided by franchise taxis. But then, that means for ordinary taxi drivers, we will be deprived of high-spending consumers during the non-peak hours. So, 600 franchised taxis cannot help the ordinary taxis. So while we support the direction of the bill, we're against the franchised taxi scheme. Now you have all ridden on taxis. Have you ever commended a taxi driver who gave you premium service? I have checked with my friends. Very few of them are willing to do that. Well, these are your policies, and yet even yourself cannot implement it. So how can you expect us to do it as well? So your proposal is not convincing. Thank you. Thank you. Mr. Lam Kok Choi. My job is to manage taxi drivers, and our drivers are in a very difficult situation. Have you really enforced the law? Do you know why we have a shortage of taxi drivers? Have you tried to help them? How come we cannot attract new blood to the industry? So our taxi drivers are getting older and older, and one by one they want to retire. Has the government ever tried to help us to address this problem? And do you have any law to regulate the hire cars? Some drivers are saying that they may as well buy a car and then operate their own hire car service. Do we have laws to regulate such behavior? For instance, when we were kids, we had fish balls from hawkers on the road. The hawkers did not require any license, but they do now. So for Google Vans and Uber, they can provide hire service, and the government is not taking any enforcement action. You talked about 600 franchised taxis. Where can you find the drivers? Will the drivers come from the current 18,000 taxis? That means you are not going to help the 18,000 taxis available now. Instead, you will introduce 600 franchised taxis. The industry is operating in very difficult conditions. We don't have enough drivers, and many taxis are idle. I don't know what to say. Thank you. I strongly urge the administration to crack down on illegal hire cars. Now we have Hong Kong laws to regulate taxis, and our taxi drivers have special driving licenses, and the taxis have to be examined twice a year, and the insurance premiums are higher than ordinary private cars, and our taxi fares are subject to regulation by Hong Kong laws, and there can be no bargaining of taxi fare between the passenger and driver, and so the taxi is regulated by Hong Kong laws. Unfortunately, we're not being protected, and the illegal hire cars, Uber, and are now eroding our business, and at the expense of law-abiding taxi drivers. Although the government plans to introduce 600 franchised taxis, is going to seriously undermine the livelihood of ordinary taxi drivers. Thank you. Thank you. Mr. Yu Hock-Shing. Good morning, Chairman and members of the Bills Committee. I'm a taxi owner as well as a driver. I joined the trade 20 years ago. I used to work for about 10 hours a day, and I could make a living. Now I have to be on the road for 16 to 17 hours. I have to take my meal on my car. Now we are not protected by minimum wage, and if we do not make enough, we cannot rest for the day. So if the government doesn't crack down on illegal hire cars, our industry will even be more non-viable. Thank you. Mr. Feng, thank you. I'm a taxi driver. However, our taxi fares are on the low side, so our income is much lower than other industries. Yet, all over the world, governments are cracking down on illegal hire cars, whereas our government is not doing the same. What's more, is going to add 600 franchised taxis, and that would make our livelihood more difficult. So please don't do so. Thank you. Mr. Ho Wing Shing. Thank you. I am a taxi owner. So, Mr. Chen is not hardworking enough in cracking down on Ubers. Our livelihood is so difficult and our business is not viable anymore. So you should not really you should crack down on the 600 Ubers, and you should shelve the franchised taxi proposal. Thank you. Mr. Zhao Ching-hui. Good morning. I am an anti-taxi driver. I've been in the industry for more than a decade. So the proposed 600 franchised taxis are not going to help the market. I said my fellow taxi drivers, many people are using private cars as hire cars. As a result, we have more vehicles on the road. During peak hours, it takes me about 30 minutes to go from Mount Shan to University Station because the road is so congested, and other 600 taxis is not going to help. We must ensure that there is no traffic congestion so that the turnaround time for taxis can be reduced, and then our passengers will not have any grievance. Now, there are people waiting for taxis at taxi stands, and yet because of traffic congestion, no taxis can go and serve them. And when our income is low, how can we be happy and provide quality service? Now, if we can only make $10,000 or so a month, that is even more worse off than security guards. Now, for civil servants, if you do not get a pay rise, will you provide good service to the public? Now, we all work for money. When we don't make enough money, none of us will be happy. We have to pay the school fees of our children. We have to buy groceries. Well, when income is good, quality of service will be good. If we can only make sometimes $40 per month, that is even worse than statutory minimum wage. Government officials should go out to the community and see what's happening there. You should not stay in air-con rooms only. You should communicate with taxi drivers to understand their business environment and find out whether the problem lies with passengers or drivers, so that you can have good policies. You talked about the number of taxis. If you don't crack down on hire cars, what's the point?
I've been a taxi driver for more than 10 years. With the appearance of the illegal hire cars, life is really tough. Like my peers have said, many taxi drivers are now surviving on lunch boxes or simply buns. I think taxi drivers really, many of them are sick because they dare not leave the taxis, and they will simply eat the lunch boxes inside the cars. Mr. Lee Touchin. Thank you. I'm, an owner and a taxi driver. The government is not regulating the illegal hire cars like Ubers. As a result, they are proliferating on our roads now. So the government must, actually tackle these illegal hire cars. The government should really help the taxi industry rather than launching 600, franchise buses. which would actually take away the business of ordinary taxis. There is already serious social injustice already in Hong Kong. I therefore suggest the government should scrap the proposal to launch franchise taxis. Thank you. Madam Zhang Jianju. I'm sorry I have a sore throat, so I'm not able to speak today. Mr. Chen Shui-sun. Thank you. Good morning. Our economy is, doing badly, and despite the social disturbance, the government still insists on, pushing ahead with the, pilot scheme to issue franchise buses, increasing the number of taxis on the road, creating, unnecessary competition, forcing people to actually stand up in rebellion. So this is contrary to the government's objective to create a harmonious society. The mass transit system in Hong Kong is up to world standard. We have a small place with a large population. Our roads simply cannot cope with a large number of vehicles. We have problems like illegal hire cars. They have proliferated a lot in the last few years, and the government has no policy to regulate these illegal, hire cars, thus causing severe congestion on the roads. So this is a serious social problem. At the moment, the taxi industry is already, struggling. During strikes and demonstrations, the turnover for the taxi drivers every day has now dropped drastically. These are the conspiracies of people with ulterior motives. They use the pretext that the taxi quality service is not good, and therefore creating the pretext to allow illegal hire cars to operate. The Transport Advisory Committee proposes to increase the number of taxis in order to wipe out illegal hire cars. I don't think this will work. We have inadequate mass transit only during and they only pick up more passengers during the peak hours. Taxis actually play a significant role, so increasing the number of taxis on the roads will only, adversely affect the livelihood of taxi drivers and add to the, and therefore actually create more traffic congestion. And it will not really improve, the proposal will not improve taxi quality. It will only create more division within our society. Why doesn't the government review taxi fares together with the mass transit, the fares charged by mass transit, utility companies? I urge the members to support the government, would ask the government to actually, suspend the proposal in order not to create more social grievances. Well, I've been in the taxi industry for a long time. Right now, our operating environment is really very bad. Even the mid-levels and central, where you have the more affluent, passengers, they would rather prefer to ride on PLBs instead. You have taxis on the roads which are not hired. So the environment is really very bad. If the government were to launch another 600 new taxis on the road, it will really further aggravate the social division we face. Mr. Choi Tak-chung, thank you. I'm the owner of a single taxi myself. I hope that I'm relying on this single taxi to give me retirement protection. But after the appearance of the illegal hire cars, our business are now dropping. Furthermore, insurance premium is going up. Our penalties have also has also been raised, and this will further add to the difficulties that we face. If the government were to approve, if you were to approve the government proposal to launch 600 additional taxis on the road, there would be more competition for passengers. Taxi drivers there will be even more a more severe shortage of taxi drivers. Of course, we do not want the price of taxi license to drop, but I don't think the price of taxi license would rise drastically as well. So if the price of taxi license were to fall, my retirement will be adversely affected. I hope that after my retirement, my taxis will be able to support my livelihood. I don't want the price of my taxi license to become a negative equity so that I will have to ride on CSSA for my retirement. Thank you. Madam Lam Sao Kin, thank you. I'm a anti-taxi driver. Since our fares are regulated by law and we have to abide by the law, taxi drivers cannot haggle with the passengers on fares. But on the other hand, we are facing competition from Uber and the illegal hire cars, and they are taking away our business. So I hope the government can really pay attention to the problem we face. The taxi drivers are rather old in age. For those of us who've been driving taxis for more than 10 years, we are all very conscientious and experienced drivers. We don't want to retire prematurely. But given that the operating environment is so difficult for taxi drivers, and many in-service taxi drivers will only drive for one shift lasting 10 hours a day, and they have to drive for 6 or 7 days in a week, and it's difficult for them to find replacement drivers. I hope the government will really, care for the difficulties that we face. Ms. Mapuike. Thank you. Good morning. I'm the chairman of the NC Taxi Drivers Association. I don't think the government is actually doing anything to help the owners and drivers of the 18,000 taxis. The government is ignoring the effort made by our taxi drivers. They are ignoring that they don't care whether our drivers are able to make ends meet and whether we have sufficient labor supply. On the other hand, the government is not tackling the illegal hire cars. The government is insisting on launching another 600 franchise buses onto the roads. So I'd like to ask, what kind of administration is this? Taxi drivers are feeling very helpless, and therefore we strongly object to the proposal to launch 600 franchise taxis. Thank you. Madam Yang Lam Shan. Good morning. And good morning, members. I'm a taxi owner and a driver myself. I've been in the taxi business for 20 years. Since the social disturbance began, we are facing difficulties as tourist numbers are falling, more and more drivers leaving the business, the industry, and our incomes are falling. But the government is not doing anything to help us. Instead, it is insisting on launching the pilot scheme for franchise buses, and this will, further add to the problems that we face. In fact, the taxi industry has made a lot of contribution to society. We carry students and workers to work every day. We're helping thousands of families every day. I therefore hope the government will withdraw this proposal to launch 600 franchise buses so that our industry will have more room to survive. Mr. Chair Kam Chiu, thank you. I'm the owner of a single taxi and a driver as well. Our business environment is very bad now. We are not doing much business, and there is a shortage of drivers. We wanted to take a break and find, someone to stand in for us. We simply cannot do that. I hope the government will actually scrap the proposal to issue 600 licenses for 600 franchise buses. Madam Wong Shut Fong, thank you. I'd like to thank our peers because they've already said what I wanted to say today. Thank you so much. Thank you. Mr. Yang Kam-ming. Thank you. I am an in-service taxi driver. I've been in the industry for more than 30 years. I think our working environment and our incomes now and the social environment are all very bad. It's the worst that I've seen since I've joined the taxi industry. We are facing road congestion, for example, in Tseung Kwan O. As far as I can remember, traffic congestion will only begin at 7 a.m., but now it is starting already at 6:15, which proves that with the increased number of cars on the roads and the government is not building new roads, as a result, we are now having severe traffic jams. And yet the government is still proposing to deploy 600 franchise buses on the roads. And this will further add to the confusion on our roads. Furthermore, the appearance of these franchise taxis will create division within the industry because you're going to have all premium taxis and others which are not considered premium, and this will add to the conflict among drivers. I remember vividly that when the government first met with us at a meeting in Kowloon Park, the government officials then only proposed to increase the number of taxis because they have not issued new taxi license for decades. So the government had this plan. And the industry then told the government that this was not going to be viable. But now that we have a new administration, the government still insists on, pushing through this bill. I hope the government will be considerate of the social environment now, which is and the difficulties that the taxi industry is facing, and the proliferation of illegal hire cars on our roads, which resulted in our drivers having to work very long hours. Many taxi drivers have several phones in the car simply because they want to earn more incomes, and they're also facing more dangers. I therefore hope the government will withdraw the proposal to launch the 600 new franchise taxis.
Mr. Yip Chang-hwa, good morning. I am an investor in taxis. I started in 1965. I bought my taxi back then. I spent $26,000, and it was enough to buy a flat. And I spent $12,000 on a taxi license. And back then, a flat would cost $36,000. I invested in a taxi. However, I could not find anyone to drive in a night shift. I have to park the car in a car park and pay parking fees. I used to be a car salesman in a motor company. Now, the 24 seats vehicles became legal public passenger vans, and now we have 16 and 19 seats vans. Now, if you wanted to get apply for license, the department would consider whether the route was already covered by a franchised bus. So, for public vans, there could only be a few seats now. For some likes public, some like goods or vans, they could take passengers as well as goods. For new taxis, we can only have a capacity of 5, including the taxi driver. So these vans are more competitive than taxis, and that's why taxi business cannot be viable. A taxi driver decided to buy a van to do business instead of working as a taxi driver. Now it's so difficult to find a taxi driver. A driver may only be willing to work for 3 days. I have to work daytime as well, and I would ask a night shift driver to take my taxi for free. So that's all I want to say. Thank you. Mr. Leung Fai Kiew. Thank you. I am a taxi driver. I am against the proposal of franchised taxis. My fellow drivers have talked about our difficult operating environment, so I will say no more so as not to waste your time. Thank you. Some deputations or individuals were late, and I will invite them to speak now. Mr. Chen Kalong, good morning. Now, I just came back from Yilan of Taiwan. There is a taxi museum there. Many people may be in Taiwan to observe the elections there. You may want to visit the taxi museum as well. I visited myself, and I was inspired. Now we are discussing the franchised taxi scheme. Now they are not really premium taxis, so make no mistake. Whether it is a premium taxi doesn't hinge on whether it is a franchised taxi. It all depends on the quality of service provided by the driver. Now we've only got 1,200 licenses. Now I think we should legalize Uber instead of introducing a franchised taxi scheme. All right. While we are on the bill, now if the government decides to bulldoze through the scheme, now there should be the following points to note. First, franchise taxis can only have a maximum capacity of 5. This is rather outdated. Ubers can be very successful because there can be 7-seaters, so people don't have to hail 2 taxis. Since you're going to introduce franchise taxis, you should allow different vehicle types to carry more passengers. Now, when public vans have their increased number of seats, then many taxi drivers came out to object. And when can we have a timetable for barrier-free access taxis? Because many elderly persons and wheelchair users need this kind of service. So give us a timetable as soon as possible. And when can we have taxis that are barrier-free with universal access? Now, I once rode on a Honda type taxi, and the driver told me that he was never coached on how to use the wheelchair board. So the hardware is there, but the software is not ready. So when you have barrier-free taxis, you have to ensure that drivers know how to serve this kind of passengers. Now, for 7-seaters, there can be diesel vehicles. How come for franchised taxis we do not have diesel vehicles? Now in Taiwan, they have many co-sharing taxis. Why can't we amend the law so that there can be pooling, taxi pooling. Now, at Kwantong Road, after 10 p.m., there are many taxis parked there, blocking the lane. You have used up your time. Mr. Yong Ming Chow? Thank you. I think passengers have 5 demands for premium taxi services. First, there must be green traffic. When it comes to premium taxis, you should introduce green taxis. If you ask me whether LPG taxis are environmental friendly, I have reservation. Perhaps we can introduce electrical and hybrid vehicles. And second, you should ensure taxis can serve both the disabled and able bodies. Many taxis cannot serve wheelchair users. Now, operator of Diamond Cab is next to me. After the introduction of Diamond Cab, there is additional choice for wheelchair users. With competition comes progress. The third is the use of IT for online hailing. There can be mobile apps for hailing of taxis. Why can't we introduce technology? Now, do we always have to pay with cash? For instance, if it is the fare is $24.90, we always have to pay $25. Perhaps we can use electronic payment. And there should be a multimodal arrangement. For instance, if it is during peak time, the fare can be cut. The fare can be 50% higher than ordinary taxis, but during non-peak times, perhaps there can be some discount, and then the unit cost can be pegged to the distance, so that the passengers can have more choice. And you should have personalized services that is customer-oriented. Why is it that people would rather drive Uber than taxis? Because the design of taxis is such that they can't even carry a few more pieces of luggage. And then is also not a comfortable ride if there are too many passengers. That being the case, passengers will of course go for a more comfortable ride. I am a member of the Sha Tin District Council. Next to me, there is an LPG refilling station, and taxi drivers very often parked on yellow boxes, waiting to be refilled. So they would cause traffic congestion, so they should consider the needs of passengers as well. So apart from having premium taxis, we should also improve the current taxi trade. I am taxi driver. I'm against the proposal to have 600 franchised taxis, because they will take away taxi drivers from ordinary taxis. We are very short of taxi drivers for the night shift. Many taxis are idle at night. For 3 days in a week, we cannot find taxi drivers. It is a little bit better during the night shift, because for taxi drivers, they don't really have business. After the peak hours are over, they will only queue up at taxi stands waiting to be hired. The industry needs assistance from the government instead of competition. Because after license is issued, the government has the responsibility to help to modernize the industry so that it will not be outdated. For instance, octopus should be used, and the government should help taxi drivers to install the octopus device. And there is also the need to have a credit card payment. The government is not giving us any assistance now. Is proposing 600 franchised taxis. Now, if that doesn't work, it will introduce another 600. So what is the point of having a trial scheme? The industry, as well as the 18,000 taxis already on the road, will be hurt. So the government has collected license fees from them, and therefore it has the responsibility to help them. Thank you. I'd like to ask whether there are deputations who were late when the other deputations were speaking. If none, then I will give the floor to the administration to respond. Thank you. Thank you, Chairman, for arranging this public hearing so that we can receive views from deputations and individuals present, so that we can know their views on the franchised taxis scheme. Now, I'd like to respond to the remarks by deputations. I have to stress that the purpose of having franchised taxis is not to phase out ordinary taxis. We're not giving up on them. Rather, we're going to provide a point-to-point personalized service. We adopt a dual approach. We have to cooperate with the current taxis through the service. The Committee on Taxi Service Quality will enhance the operating environment of taxis, and we propose that a new measure should be introduced on a pilot basis so that we can introduce franchise taxes. There will be a new regulatory regime to enhance management and improve service. The two can complement one another. Their positioning will be different in the future. Ordinary taxis will still be the mainstay to provide point-to-point personalized service, and the fares are more affordable to the general public. There won't be too many franchised taxis. They will provide an alternative to satisfy the demand for better services and more personalized point-to-point service. We understand that the industry have concerns about the introduction of franchise taxis as expressed by deputations just now. In formulating taxi policies, we have taken into account views of members of the public. In 2015, 16, and 17, we consulted the transport panel of this council, and then we have met with representatives from the industry a number of times to gauge their views so as to modify our proposal on franchised taxis. The model proposed now is the outcome of various consultations with different stakeholders. It represents balance of the views and concerns of different sectors. Having said so, we are willing to listen to the views of different sectors. Regarding concerns raised by deputations, I'd like to make the following response regarding labor shortage of the industry. I note that some members are concerned that the introduction of 600 franchise taxis may aggravate the manpower shortage of the industry. In fact, the 600 franchise taxis would only represent 3% of the 18,000 taxis in the industry. There are 21,000 licenses available, and I think the introduction of the franchised buses will not have a major impact on the current manpower situation.
It will attract more people to join the industry. To do that, the government proposed to amend the law so that people with a valid driving license for 3 years we're relaxing the threshold to 1 year for those who apply for the taxi license. We've consulted the industry and the transport panel and the road safety committee, and we have obtained their support. The government proposes to submit the amendment proposals to electoral this year. Furthermore, the TD has also completed its review to enhance the written examination of taxi drivers, for example, adjusting the examination content and the passing rate in order to attract more people to join the industry. In terms of enhancing taxi service, we are pleased to see the efforts made by the industry, and we're grateful for what they've done. Regarding the industry proposal regarding the pilot scheme for premium taxis, as we propose as in the supplementary information we submitted to the panel, although we have made reference of the given that the service of the fleet of taxi drivers will be subject to the constraint of the operating model, so the verification is on a voluntary basis. So service quality cannot really be guaranteed by way of legislation. A better approach is to introduce the bill and a new regulation mode to introduce a limited number of franchise taxis. Of course, we're happy to see the industry to introduce measures to monitor the service quality of taxis in order to enhance service quality, and therefore the TD had expanded the commendation scheme for taxi industry. Other than presenting awards to outstanding taxi drivers, we also have presented awards to the taxi management team in order to amend those taxi drivers who are offering quality service, and we will also promote that. As to whether or not we can change existing taxi drivers into taxi licenses into franchise taxi license. So we proposed that some people say regarding this proposal, we have on different occasions explained that this proposal is not a simple one. There are legal and financial considerations, and furthermore, it's contrary to the principle of fair competition. Details are already contained in the supplementary information. In the present proposal, we welcome existing taxi operators to bid for the right to operate franchise taxis. Operating ordinary taxis and also operators of other public transports, they would get a higher score when they apply or when they bid for the right to operate these franchise taxis. We also propose that among the fleet of these franchise taxis, no less than 50% of them would have to be able to accommodate wheelchair users. In the long term, the government will introduce more taxis that can actually accommodate wheelchair users. And also, we will be introducing new models which will accommodate wheelchair users. Compared with only 20 in early 2015, by the end of 2019, 700 odd taxis can already, accommodate wheelchair users. The government will continue to monitor the number of, wheelchair accessible taxis. We'll continue to listen to the trade to see how we can further accommodate the wheelchair users, so that in the tender exercise, we will stipulate the number of such franchise taxis which should accommodate wheelchair users. According to data in 2018, the taxi, on average, a taxi will actually run 14 times the mileage of ordinary cars. So franchise taxis is a form of personalized point-to-point, public transport, and the franchise taxis can, encourage people who drive their own cars to ride on these franchise taxis, and thus would therefore reduce the number of private cars on the roads and thus relieve the burden on the roads. As for buying back the taxi license, permanent taxi license is a form of private property. Buying back these licenses would require the consent of the license holders. Furthermore, each taxi license may, taxi drivers have been purchased at different prices at different times. So it will be a complicated exercise for us to, if we were to buy back these taxi license, and whether we have to ask whether it's right to use public funds to buy back these private taxi licenses, which is a form of private property. We will need to support the public and also approval by the FC. Based on these considerations, we believe that this proposal has already, I think we have the consensus. It's not easy to get a consensus among taxi license holders, the public, legislature, and so on, regarding tackling, illegal overcharging passengers. We will certainly enforce the law stringently. Regarding the road public transport ordinance, any a vehicle without a valid, car hiring license operating on road will be considered to have broken the law. Regarding the platform operating hire car service, the government will consider each and every case in question and carry out proper investigation. And we'll also increase the penalties for illegal hire cars, thus protecting the safety of the passengers. Regarding the offense of illegally operating hire cars, the Transport Department is already conducting a review and have already proposed adjustments to the penalties. In February and March 2019, we consulted the TAC and the Transport Panel, and we have obtained the support already. The government have already begun the amendment for the ordinance, and we will submit the proposals to legislature in due course. Finally, I'd like to thank all the deputations for coming here to give us their views today. Going forward, when the Bills Committee scrutinizes the bill and when we implement measures to improve taxi service, we'll certainly take on board all your valuable views. Thank you. Members may now ask questions, and I propose that each member begin with 5 minutes each. Siu Ka Fai, Lam Cheuk Ting, Jeremy Tam, Yu Si Wing, Mr. Frankie Yik, and myself. So we begin with Mrs. Siu Ka Fai. Thank you. I think our discussion today is focused on the government's proposal to launch 600 additional franchise taxis on the roads for the general public and the consumers at large. It will be easier for them to board a taxi, and I'm sure they will support the proposal. If you were to consult the general public and conduct a referendum, I'm sure the majority will support this proposal. But what I'd like to ask is, why is it that we have a limit on the number of taxis on the roads in Hong Kong? We have 18,000. Why is it not 180,000 instead? The reason is that when you have so many taxis on the road, then taxi quality will be even worse. And because of that, the government has introduced a licensing system so that the stakeholders can ensure that they have sufficient business to make a livelihood and provide the service that they should. And I don't think this is unique to the taxi industry. For lawyers, accountants, for other industries, it's the same. The majority of the delegations today object to the government proposal because they are the real stakeholders. I believe that enhancing the taxi service, nobody will object to enhancing taxi service quality. If there are 2 levels of taxis, or if you could have, more options in terms of the models that the taxi models, if they were allowed to charge a higher fare. The question is whether or not there will be too many taxis on the road, resulting in the owners and operators not being able to make a living. Many delegations talk about Uber and vans and hire cars. Problem is that many of these illegal hire cars, they are already operating in the market. They don't need a license, and they're already running on the roads. And they are taking away the business from the taxi industry. The owners pay several $1 million for the license, and these hire cars don't need to pay a cent for that. So this is unfair competition. And the department is saying that they're doing something, they're not legislation to cope with that problem, but the taxi industry operators are already losing the business. Previously, the drivers have to drive for 8 hours, now they have to drive for 12, 13 hours, and yet they still can't make ends meet. And now you're telling to add another 600 taxis on the road. I mean, it's simple logic. How are you going to enforce the law? If you tell them that nobody needs to follow the law, then I think everybody will operate a Uber car. And then there will be total chaos on our roads. Have you really considered that? So if you want to improve taxi quality service, I think you can give them, the room to upgrade their vehicles. They can, operate a taxi, a Mercedes-Benz or a BMW and charge the customers a higher fare. But you cannot totally confuse the market. You only talk about convenience. What I want to say is that you can now get online legal service on online medical consultation. It's all right to use technology, but these service providers have to be licensed. If you allow someone to be a lawyer without a license or a doctor, I'm sure the people in the profession will object. So to improve service quality, right, it's right, all right, but you have to ensure that the operators are licensed. But the taxi operators are not able to make ends meet. All right, so if you want to improve service quality, why do you allow the industry to apply? Now, in the last 2 years, especially after what happened in the last 6 months, we are seeing a drop in tourist numbers. So when you formulate your policies, have you done your sums? Have you estimated whether they will be able to make a living given the drop in tourist numbers? Under Secretary? Thank you, Mr. Siu, for his series of questions. And I'd like to respond,
You mentioned some online platform. In my response just now, I made it very clear that the government has no objection to the deployment of technology. However, we will not tolerate any illegal activities under the pretext of technology. So if it is an apps with a valid license, that is fine. But if the taxi doesn't have a valid license for doing business using the apps, then this is illegal. Mr. Shugafei, no, that was not a question I asked. The question was, has it whether worked out there would be sufficient business for the number of vehicles? Yes. I will allow a second round of questions. So please join the queue again, Mr. Shield. Mr. Lam Chek-ting. Thank you. Taxi licenses were purchased and they are private property. So this is an operating cost. Whereas for Uber, there is no license fee at all. So one doesn't have to pay a license fee and the other does. And so this is not fair. And the Undersecretary claims that there will be zero tolerance for illegal practice. However, now the police are not taking enforcement action against illegal parking, even outside police stations. So is it going to catch the Uber operators? Now, you say that Ubers would affect the industry. I'm more concerned about the Uber drivers because they are not protected by insurance. Uber may offer protection for passengers, but not for the drivers. So you do not regulate against Ubers, you do not take enforcement action, and the taxi industry is being affected. And that's the reason why they have so many grievances. And with so many taxi drivers here, I have to say that the black sheep in your industry are damaging the reputation of your whole trade. So this franchise that taxi scheme will first call premium taxis, and then you criticize that because you think that the government is thinking that your services are not premium. This is because there is overcharging and also poor driving attitude of drivers. I recently hired a taxi. I sat in the front seat, and then there were 4 mobile phones in front of the driver. He had an earpiece to take down business, and he was also using a pen to operate his mobile phones, and different mobile phones have different earpieces. And then how can a driver cope with so many things? One to control the steering wheel, and one to control the mobile phone, and another the earpiece. I didn't know what to do. I was so worried. If I criticize him, and if he had to take orders, he had to dispatch orders, then I wondered whether he was operating in a call center or a taxi driver. I think this is indeed a very bad example of your trade. I was in Shanghai. I don't think a taxi driver should operate in this manner. So the industry should really tackle your own black sheep. Otherwise, the community will, of course, support the introduction of competition by the government. Now, I have a question for the Undersecretary. We asked you to legislate, to punish the black sheep of the industry. For drivers that overcharge, their license should be suspended at once, but you refused. And then what are you going to do about Ubers? These drivers are not covered by insurance. And you may say that, well, since you are breaking the law, you deserve it. But should that be the approach of the government? This government is so weak, and we don't know how long this government can last. We don't know whether you can last until the bill is passed. People keep saying that Carrie Lam would be out of job very soon. So please think twice. All right, Mr. Lam asked about penalty for taxi drivers that have broken the regulations. Now, for the operation of Ubers, I have stressed time and again that it is okay for different apps to be used. The question is whether the operator has got a license for operating a hire car. No, I'm asking you, how are you going to enforce the law? Outside police stations, we have illegal parking, and there is no enforcement, no penalty tickets issued in the recent half years. There are only 10 seconds for the Undersecretary. The government will continue to crack down on law-breaking behavior. Well, Mr. Jeremy Tam, I think both passengers and drivers have a lot of grievances to air. Now, I'd like to focus on the report by the Competition Commission. I think the administration has got paper CB 222/1920/04. Now, I tend to agree with some of the views of the report. For instance, there's overregulation of the taxi trade. On the other hand, there is the criticism that there is insufficient flexibility for taxis to set their own fares. I find the report by the Competition Commission a bit contradictory. Now, for setting of fare level, according to the Commission, if you fix the fee at 50% higher than that of ordinary taxis, I don't know what you intend to do. Of course, from the perspective of passengers, they want fares to be as cheap as possible and service as good as possible. And according to the Commission, the way you set the fare is to protect the current trade. Now, if you really want competition, you should not just protect one side. And if you want to protect one side, you may as well shelve the franchised taxi scheme. So for franchised taxis, you should give them the flexibility to set the fee at 30 to 50% higher than that of ordinary taxis. Otherwise, you can have no innovation, and you have to remember that this is just a trial scheme. Within these 5 years, if you see the merits of franchised taxis, you can introduce them to all 18,000 taxis. You allow flexibility in fare level, even for ordinary taxis. Can that be done? Understand that if you amend the regulation right from the start, that may be too aggressive a move. So will you do that after the trial scheme? And as for giving tips. Now, the Competition Commission is against the giving of tips to expedite a match. Now, and you have not set a cap for the payment of tips. There may be the possibility that a successful tenderer would keep raising the level of the tip. I think the Commission has got a very good piece of advice for you, and you should consider that. And as for the pilot scheme, it's okay for it to have a term of 5 years, but the review should be done earlier than that. I understand that you don't want to introduce new licenses 3 years into the scheme, but that doesn't mean that you cannot do something after 5 years. You should review the scheme earlier on, and then you should let people know whether the trial scheme will end or continue after 5 years. And the good points in the scheme can be extended to ordinary taxis. You may not be able to respond to all these points at once, but at least you should respond to the views by the Commission. I hope that there can be written response from the administration to the Competition Commission's advice. The Competition Commission has written to the Bills Committee as well, and it's been photostated to members. Undersecretary, would you like to address the points raised by Mr. Tam? Thank you. Mr. Tam asked for a written response to the Competition Commission's advice that can be done. And just a few simple points. The government notes the advice from the Commission, and we appreciate that the advice was tendered from the perspective of competition. We're of the view that the 500 franchised taxis would not reduce competition in the trade. Mr. Yu Shiwing. I think the franchise taxi scheme is putting the cart before the horse, because the current problem with taxi service is about the hardware and software, and the government should be more focused in tackling the problem. Now, for the industry, they face a lot of difficulties in terms of operating costs and revenue, and the government should focus on addressing these issues. And the government is using an expedient approach in introducing 500 franchised taxis. Now, if this 600 franchise taxis cannot improve the situation, will another 600 or even 12,000 or 1,200 franchised taxis be introduced? the government has only adopted stopgap approach. There are things that the industry needs help, and the first is labor shortage. The administration has already amended the examination, and I think that should be the right way forward for addressing their concerns. And some members talked about illegal hire cars. There is no solution from the administration. The Undersecretary talks about enhanced enforcement. If that worked, we would not have seen the problems here. At our airport, there are so many illegal hire cars toting the tourists. And then black spots such as Tsim Sha Tsui and the Peak Tram Station. I think these are black spots for you to take enforcement action, so you should focus on them. Now, if current taxi license holders are willing to improve both their hardware and software to meet the requirements of franchised taxis, will you be willing to withdraw your franchised taxis scheme so that you can have more than 600 franchised taxis as a result? And what about electronic payment and also the proposal from Diamond Cap? Will you discuss with the industry and relax your requirements on the facilities so as to improve the services of ordinary taxis? And after that, if they would like to raise fares, can you be more forthcoming so that they can it will be easier for them to recruit drivers? Thank you. 3 questions from Mr. Yu Shiwing. The first is enforcement action against online hailing. Now, as I said, we are not against the use of technology, but those vehicles must be legal, and we have taken decoy operations to crack down on overcharging at black spots. And as for other facilities, do we allow improvement of facilities by current taxis? We have frequent contact with the taxi trade.
In the consultation of the proposed bill, we have had many rounds of consultation with the industry. We are aware of the concerns. We have tried our best to explain to them our position, to help them understand, our rationale. So, as I stressed just now, in the process of proposing this bill, we'll continue to listen to your views as to whether or not the existing vehicles could be changed. I think in my earlier response, I've already said that we welcome the existing taxi operators to apply to operate franchise taxis, so long as they have the experience and they will get a higher score when they bid for the franchise. So we welcome them to bid for the franchise. Chairman, I said you should talk to the existing taxi operators rather than those who want to apply for operation of franchise license taxis. So are you willing to talk to them, on how the ordinary taxis can make improvements? I've already said that we'll welcome the existing taxi operators to apply for the franchise taxi license. Mr. Frankie Yik. Thank you. First of all, I'd like to thank all the delegations for coming here today to give us their views. Most of them represent the taxi industry. 4 of the delegates have already expressed their views representing the taxi trade. The majority of them are objecting to the proposed bill. I will not repeat what they've said just now, but I'd like to respond to what the Undersecretary said. You said that in this proposal, you've continuously liaised with the industry. I beg your pardon. I joined LegCo in 2012. I have worked closely with the taxi industry. I have never heard them saying that you have officially consulted them, except for one occasion when there was a meeting at the government office and the meeting ended up with a big quarrel. You say that you've attended the annual dinners of the taxi industry. You might have chatted with the operators, casually, and you say that is consultation. Do you have minutes of such consultation? Have you agreed with the industry about, the agreements you reach at these consultations? Don't say that you've been consulting the industry. I do not agree with that. You say 600 franchise taxis is only a small minority compared with the 18,000 ordinary taxis. It's not an issue. I think you're talking nonsense. And then you change your argument, say that the 600 franchise taxis can cope with the higher demand of some of the, citizens. That's a new, argument. You said one taxi is equivalent to 14 private cars. Normally, a taxi is equivalent to about 10 private cars. 600 franchise taxis is equivalent to 6,000, private cars. How can you claim, therefore, that they will not have any impact on public transport? The industry, well, you talk about new proposals like easier for people now to apply for taxi license and so on. All these are the demand put forward by the taxi industry. It's not the government which initiated these reforms. In order to save the industry, we have been putting forward all these proposals to the government. And they've also recently proposed. And it's not just recently that they did that. They asked why won't you allow the taxi industry to have a pilot first? And we would argue that when the GMB was the red PLB was changed into the GMB routes, you impose all kinds of additional conditions and allow the industry to switch. Why can't you do the same for the taxi industry? You can impose conditions for them to switch over to operate franchise taxis. If it works for the PLB, why doesn't it work for the taxis? Mr. Yu said that they are willing to do it, but you're not willing to talk to them. And the industry also proposed to you that there should be, a verification scheme for premium taxis. We hope that there could be policies to do that, but you say that the government doesn't have the authority, the power to regulate. In the last few years, the industry has already learned the lessons based on, passenger surveys. They have constantly been improving their service quality. Several senior officials have told us that they have found that in the last 2 or 3 years, the service quality of taxi drivers have improved. In customer surveys, this has also been confirmed. Why aren't you helping them? At the last meeting, we've asked our secretariat to conduct a study on what measures are adopted in other jurisdictions to help the taxi industry. They've all tried to find ways to help improve taxi quality, rather than like what you're doing to actually launch 600 additional taxis on the road. In Chicago, what they do is that they would recognize 2 official apps and compel the taxi drivers to use them. You have a car hail, platform. The more people use such a platform, the more efficient it is. It's not like what the Consumer Council is saying that if they are like the Consumer Council just said we should launch 20, 30 odd such apps. In New York, they have a 2-year pilot scheme. The government operated with 2 taxi apps operators in order for people to pre-book taxis. In Toronto, they allow flexi fares so that taxi can operate on designated routes. In London, they've increased the total number of taxi stands by 20%, allowing traditional black cabs to use additional taxi bus routes. So in all these countries, they are implementing measures to help the taxi industry, rather than like what you are doing, not doing anything to help them. Chairman, if you allow me to continue, I still have a lot more to say. If I may allow you to speak in your second round, Mr. Tony Chair. Thank you. First of all, I'd like to thank the deputations, including the taxi operators and the representatives, for coming here to give us their views. The Undersecretary had already responded to some of the views just now. I was attending another meeting next door, so I was not present during part of the meeting. So if the point I'm making has been made already, let me know. Regarding franchise taxis, both the taxi operators and the public only one is that we should improve service quality. Since we have a common objective, my question is that, of course, the government will designate the fares for these franchise taxis, which is 50% higher than those of ordinary taxis. There are also other requirements in terms of hardwares and softwares. So my question is this. Of course, how is the fares, packed to the service quality? How can you guarantee and ensure that a higher fare would mean that there would be better service? And secondly, regarding the manpower supply for the taxi industry and whether there's any new blood joining the industry. We want to improve taxi service quality, but has the government really considered the issue thoroughly? Very often I have the impression that the government would put forward a proposal, but the proposal wouldn't resolve the problem. It's simply a response. The government is simply saying we're doing something to respond to your demand. I wonder whether, I'd like to ask the Undersecretary whether you've considered the question thoroughly. You have 18,000 ordinary taxis, although the taxi drivers already made efforts to improve their service quality, but still we cannot deny that the public still have expectations of taxi service as how they can do better. So what has the government done in this regard, especially for these 18,000 odd taxis? What has the government done to help them improve service quality, and what have you done to attract more new blood to join the industry? Could the Undersecretary answer these two questions first? Thank you, Mr. Chair, for your question. Regarding the service quality of the 18,000 ordinary taxis, the TD is chairing a committee to monitor the service quality of taxis. And we're already seeing some results. In my earlier response, I said that we are encouraged to see the efforts made by the industry and will continue to follow up as to how we will regulate the franchise taxis. Through the terms of the franchise chair, Undersecretary, I'm asking, how can you say you're packing the higher fare to the service quality? The flat 4 is $36. How can you ensure that the service quality of the franchise taxis are better than ordinary taxis? Regarding the question of fares and service quality, the fares that we're now proposing is different from those of ordinary taxis, so that the customers have a choice. In my overall response, I already said that franchise taxis will offer an option for the public, and the fares is one of the means to differentiate the two. The terms of the franchise stipulate that the franchisee should maintain a minimum number of vehicles and the percentage of taxis that will be in service, at the time of responding to public inquiries, complaints, taxi training, and so on. there were all these ways we regulate the performance of the franchisee. We've also laid down, performance parameters. For example, we stipulate the ratio of taxis that should be able to provide, taxi service during peak hours, which is 90%, and the percentage will be lower during the slack hours. We would require the franchisee to submit proposals regarding the performance, and they will also be required. Chairman, I don't think I have enough time. What the Undersecretary was saying, I suppose by that he means premium quality. Have you talked to the taxi industry? That is, if they are able to enhance their service quality, what happens if they're able to do that? Have you explored that? We always encourage existing taxi operators to improve their service quality. We have seen that the industry has made good efforts. And in the last few years, we have seen that the service quality is improving, and we're pleased to do that. So the franchise taxis will simply mean an additional alternative for the public to choose. You talk about choice for the public. Many of the delegates already raised the question regarding illegal hire cars causing congestion on the road. They talk about taxi drivers being stigmatized, the question of, the income of taxi drivers, the question of, taxi license and so on. In your response to members' questions, I think you've been avoiding the issue. You've not directly answered the questions raised by the delegates. You are saying that the government's already done enough. So my question for you is this: the delegations have already told us that the business is being taken away by those who operate online hiring. So you said that you have taken some investigation and operations to combat the problem. So what have you done, and what achievements have been made? Have these platforms been eradicated? Have you taken any operations to stop them from engaging in such illegal activities? Could the TD respond to that? Thank you. Regarding law enforcement, I can tell you about what the police have been doing. Regarding enforcement, the police will continue to step up the effort against illegal hiring. From May to July 2019, regarding 170-odd illegal charging, the government taking enforcement action. At the same time, people who have been, prosecuted for illegal hiring and had the license revoked, there were 125 in total. The police will continue to adopt a focused, approach to take enforcement action, and will investigate into complaints. Regarding, overcharging, we will increase the deterrence. Hopefully, that can enhance safety and provide better guarantee for the passengers. The TD has also proposing to increase the penalty for illegal overcharging. The penalty to first-time offence of $5,000 and will be raised to $10,000, and the second offence $10,000 to $25,000. And the period of impounding the offending vehicle for the first offence, it's 6 months. Second offence 12 months. Under the Road Safety Ordinance, Section 25, there will be also a provision for the, suspension of the driving license. The judge may actually revoke the license of the offending driver for a specific period of time. In respect of these proposals to increase the penalties, we've consulted the TAC, and the Transport Panel already. What you're saying are arrangements regarding how you would tackle illegal car, car hailing. I asked what actions you've taken regarding these online car platforms. You say that the police is now spending most of the effort in restoring social order. And if you ask them to spare some manpower to tackle these problems regarding illegal hire service, I mean, it may not be top on the priority. The taxi drivers, meanwhile, are, really affected by these illegal operators. They're relying on two online, hailing platforms to do business. So have you tried to tackle the problem at source? So so my question is, what have you done to tackle these illegal platforms for hire? Well, these platforms themselves are not illegal. What is illegal is whether or not the vehicles for hire has a valid license. Well, when people try to in other jurisdictions, such online hiring are legitimate, but in Hong Kong, these platforms are not subject to any regulation at all. They even distribute pamphlets to advertise the service, and members have already asked that if they offer to provide service, but meanwhile they are not covered by insurance coverage. So is the government turning a blind eye to this problem and condoning these illegal, hiring platforms?
Chairman, I beg to differ from the view that we are now condoning such behavior. Now we have to consider what is normal commercial operation and whether we have regulations to tackle such behavior. So as I said, it depends on the case and also the situation. When my time is up, I have to follow my own rules. But you talk about legal operations and also deploying vehicle passengers to cars operating illegally. I think it is good to offer more choice, but then I think one of the strongest views from the industry is whether we can introduce franchise taxis while protecting the interests of the current industry. You may recall that decades ago, there used to be an employment relationship between taxi owners and taxi drivers. Now, the taxis are rented out to drivers, and the latter have to cover their own operating expenses. So I think many of them are looking forward to restoring this employer-employee relationship. And according to your pilot scheme, now if the tenderer has this relationship, then points can be added. We'd like to know the additional score to be allocated. If it is too limited, then there is no incentive for the tenderers to set up an employee-employment relationship. So, in addition to cracking down on illegal hire cars, would there be any incentive for the employer-employee relationship to be reinstated? In future meetings, can the Undersecretary tell us something more about the tendering system? The additional score to be allocated to a proposal with this relationship. Otherwise, there can be collusion, and there can be bid rigging among the tenderers. That there will be no employee-employee relationship in all their tender proposals. Thank you. I understand that the many professional drivers would like to have an employee-employer relationship, but we have consulted the trade on whether this is feasible. proposal. So this relationship is not mandatory in our trial scheme. Rather, if there is a proposal where there will be an employer-employee relationship, then additional score will be allocated and we will assess the tenders on both the technical and financial fronts. This I know. I'm asking whether you have incentive for tenderers to introduce this relationship. Can you mandate such a relationship in 1 out of the 3 franchises? Now, the technical aspect will account for 80% of the score. So under this perspective, we will consider whether premium services can be provided, and an employer-employee relationship will be one way to ensure premium service. So we will consult, we will listen to the views of more parties so that we can improve the whole system. Mr. Shilkarjan, around the Secretary, you claimed that you've consulted many stakeholders and you believe that the 600 franchised taxis should be introduced. But have you taken into account the impact on the whole industry as a result of the past 6 months of social unrest? Have you considered whether there is sufficient business for the 18,000 ordinary taxis plus the 600 franchised taxis? Well, I don't think we like to see what has happened in the past 6 months. And as we all know, there are bound to be ups and downs in the economic cycle. The government understands the social issues in the past 6 months have hit the various sectors hard, and the impact on the transport industry is very obvious. We are willing to discuss with the relevant sectors, and where feasible and possible, we will provide assistance to improve the operating environment of the industry. In October last year, the FS announced a number of measures, including a 6-month fuel subsidy to the industry, covering taxis. For LPG taxis and public light buses, we're providing a $1 discount to every liter of LPG, equivalent to a discount of 1/3. The measure will last for 6 months. We are using various measures to help the industry. Of course, we'll continue to listen to views from the sector, and we will respond to the aspirations of the industry in a timely manner. Thank you. Now you have heard the views of the industry very clear today. Now the industry is asking you to shelve the pilot scheme. We understand that the licenses are going to be issued over a period of time. The government has adopted a railway as the backbone of public transport. As we all know, with more railway lines, there will be less business for taxis. When the 18,000 licenses were issued, you at the same time introduced new GMB routes. And for public light buses, they used to have 16 seats. Now they have 19 seats. All these are competing with taxis. They've eaten into the business of taxis. Not to mention illegal hire cars at our airport. So the industry is telling you that they don't have enough business. You want to use technology, that's fine. You can introduce Uber taxis. But the point is, these hire cars must be licensed first. Now, for public light goods, it's just the same. They must be licensed first. They are taking away business from taxis. And you have not factored in the impact of social unrest as well. It's okay for you to upgrade the sector. You must give them support and you must give them a choice. If the existing members of the fleet would like to go for the high-end sector, that is fine. They don't have enough manpower and you want to introduce new taxis, and that's why they have come out to object. You have this committee on taxi service quality, or this you have this bills committee. You are going to start a clause-by-clause scrutiny of the bill soon, and if I do not allow the second reading of the bill before July, then the bill will lapse. Is that true? After the Bills Committee has completed its work, the bill will be reverted to the Council. And if the bill cannot be passed by July, then it cannot be implemented. Then for sure I will block the second reading debate of the bill. Order, please. Well, we have yet to start the clause-by-clause scrutiny. This is just a public hearing, and we still have a lot of deputations. I think we'll have about 2 more sessions of meetings with the deputations. There are so many issues. Just take your time. I don't think you can complete the work by July. Mr. Jeremy Tam. This is very interesting. Someone from the pro-establishment camp proposed a filibustering, and he won a wide applause from the for all present. So filibustering is not always bad. And the chairman talked about the failure of the House committee to elect a chairman. If there is no chairman from of the House committee, then the bill cannot be passed. So perhaps you should welcome that as well. So you should not always call people rioters. Things are not always simple. Sometimes filibustering is needed. And I think the pro-establishment members have a very good grasp of filibustering. So please don't always say that filibustering will break your rice bowl. Sometimes it is a means to keep your rice bowl. Perhaps this is the start of 2020. We have this New Year spirit. Perhaps what I'm going to say next will not win any applause here. Now, for myself, I support the bill. I support the franchise taxis bill because, after all, it is just a trial scheme. The trial scheme in the coming 5 years will allow us to try out something new, such as flexibility in fare level.
Of course, there will not be. This is not unlimited flexibility. Actually, if you remember, why is it that they've set the flat 4 fare 50% more than that of the ordinary taxis? This is because of a consultancy report which found out that the public was willing to pay 30% or 50% extra fare in exchange for a better taxi service. But what the government is now proposing has set the fare at the maximum, threshold of 50%. If that's your policy objective, if you think that the public is willing to pay more in exchange for a different mode of taxi service, I think you should allow for the flexibility that is a fare could be 30 to 50% more expensive, and leave it to the franchisee to set the fare level, so that for the slack hours it could be 30%, during the peak hours 50% more expensive. Only then can you have something that is really innovative. For the entire franchise taxi scheme, you're just picking something that is old and turn it into something that is independent. I don't understand why the government is doing that. In the taxi ordinance, I think when you bid for the license itself is private property, and there are some restrictions of which if you change them, you'll be subject to JR. If you change anything in respect of the charging mechanism and so on. And that is why if you want to make any improvements, you have to launch something entirely new. Of course, what will happen, how this will play out, we don't know. But there is some innovative element in this. Because you talk about mobile hailing apps. There are already some apps in existence already. The only thing that is new is flexi fare. This is already practiced in other jurisdictions where taxis charge different fares at different times. Why is it that you are not willing to do this? If the government is reluctant to do this, I will move a CSA to this effect. Secondly, regarding wheelchair taxis, you're saying that 50% of these franchise taxis should be able to accommodate wheelchair users. The diamond taxi operators have told us the difficulties that they face. There are no proper models of vehicles that can actually pass the requirements of the TD to accommodate wheelchair users. There are certain restrictions imposed by the TD. So you have to also consider that. It's different from, hire cars. For some ordinances, you only, regulate taxis and not the hire cars. So in the taxi service bill, since this is a new category of taxis, so for this new category, could you waive some of the requirements for ordinary taxis, which would actually, restrict the number of models of vehicles that could be used to accommodate wheelchair users? Especially the Motor Inspection Division of the TD. Have you tried to find out whether or not existing taxis accommodating wheelchair taxis, wheelchair users, whether you could allow for more options? Now, first of all, regarding flexi fares, the member asked whether or not we can experiment with flexi fares. I think, like other forms of public transport, such fares should be subject to regulation. The fare level we're now proposing is 50% more than that of ordinary taxis. In deciding on that level, we've considered the affordability of the people, and also we have borne in mind whether or not there will be sufficient incentive for the operators to offer quality service, given that they can charge a higher fare, and that there will be a clear distinction between their fares and those of ordinary taxis, so that they can have their respective, position in the market. Setting the level at 50% more expensive than ordinary taxi is reasonable. Regarding the different models of vehicles, we have a proposal regarding the value or the price of the proposed vehicle models. We are looking at whether or not there are more models that can accommodate wheelchair users. Mr. Frankie Yek. Let me continue with what I was saying. I think the industry has already put forward the proposals regarding, quality or premium taxis. The government saying that they are already looking at proposals. Now, for the franchise taxis, I think some of the requirements you propose are already being done by the existing operators. You've only added this so-called franchise taxis fleets. You propose that they can charge a higher fare, $35, and that you will expand the existing number of models for. And it's not different from the major taxi fleets which are already in operation in the market. You say you attach a lot of importance to issue the licensing of hire cars. Many of the delegations have strong views about this. You gave us some numbers saying that you talk about how the police had taken enforcement action. Mr. Yip told us that his organization has reported more than 180 such cases. How much prosecution has the government done? If you'd done that much, you wouldn't have a proliferation of the illegal hire cars on our roads already. You take a look at the seven-seaters. 95% of them are actually operating illegal hire service. The government has not really told the court that there is a serious proliferation of these illegal hire cars. You say you've already responded to the demands of the industry and increased the penalty. The penalty is not working. What happened really? What is really important? Whether the court will actually, impose the right penalties. So because of your fault on your part, the illegal hire car, taking away the business of the taxis, and therefore there is a shortage of drivers for different types of public transport fleets. Ms. Lam Cheuk Ting said that you also have unscrupulous operators in the taxi industry. Actually, industry really hates these unscrupulous operators. They want the government to increase the penalties of such black sheep within the industry. All the drivers here today are law-abiding drivers. We hope that you can do more to actually tackle those unscrupulous drivers. Ms. Lam also talked about taxi drivers taking orders using several phones on the taxis. We've already asked the government to review the number of mobile phones that a taxi driver can carry in the taxis. We've talked about this for a long time. Ms. Lam, another member talked about the Competition Commission, which give us their submission based on the competition model. They say that there's not enough competition in the market. I disagree. Looking at the overall environment, public transport in Hong Kong is one of the best in the world. Taxis are now competing with the MTR, the bus companies, the PLBs, and illegal hire cars, a lot more than 163. And also, you have more than 18,000 taxis. You have 9,000 taxis, 40,000 drivers on the road competing for business. How you claim that there's no competition? You say that we need more choices for the customers. Some members suggest that we should introduce flexi fares. If that were the case, then I don't think it should only apply to franchise taxis. It should also apply to ordinary taxis. We will welcome that. Especially during the peak hours, you should allow the ordinary taxis to impose a surcharge. This is nothing new. Why is it the government is not doing that? The industry have been saying that they have been actively organizing themselves to improve service, and they are already seeing results. They just want the government to give them support by way of policy so that they can do the work properly. There's no need to actually launch 600 new types of taxis, because about 10% of the taxis are not running on the roads at all. In the evening, more than 20-30% of the taxis are idling for the night shifts. We have 1.3 million people riding on taxis. Before now, it's less than 1 million. So the taxi industry is facing a lot of difficulties. You're not helping them. You're proposing to launch 600 additional taxis on the road to help help the public. I don't think that really is convincing. We will certainly take on board the views expressed by Mr. Yip and the other delegations as we go forward. We will incorporate all your views so that we can plan the work that we will do going forward, including the question of flexi fares. We have to ensure that we can clearly distinguish the two markets. As to whether or not we can switch ordinary taxis to become franchise taxis, I don't think that is a simple exercise. But anyway, we have listened, we've heard you, and going forward, we will consider those suggestions. Dr. Loh Wai Kwok, thank you. Chairman, in our earlier meeting and also at the relevant panel meeting, I and my colleagues have already express our reservations about the government's proposal. The government's not really, tackling the problem, in the right way. There are people in industry who are sincere in improving the quality of service. So I really find it very strange that the government is not helping the industry to improve the service quality. The government kept talking about market demand and proposed to launch a different type of taxis. Today we have representatives of taxi associations and taxi owners and members of representatives of the community. Although I have not heard all the deputations, but I think the majority of them hold the same view, that is, they're not in support of the government's proposal to launch franchise taxis. So to cater to the different demands of the passengers, I don't understand why we cannot allow for some flexibility. For example, some of the delegations and members of the public have asked for barrier-free, taxis. Although there are such taxis already, even though there's still room for improvement there, but the government can certainly help here so that the industry could do better in catering to the special needs of the passengers. So having heard all the deputations today, I'm more convinced that our position and the views that we have put forward earlier were really, advice which the government should heed. But over the many meetings, the THP's attitude has remained unchanged. If you are sincere in listening to the views of the industry and the views of the public, then regarding the proposal to launch franchise taxis, perhaps the government should reconsider that. Of course, the government's insistence on this proposal and is already, submitting a bill for scrutiny. So I don't know whether the government really give us a genuine response. Thank you, Dr. Low. Dr. Low has expressed many views, and I can feel that Dr. Low understands what is the issue that we're now facing. We'll certainly take on board his views. The work going forward will be tough, but we hope that we'll have your support. Mr. Shukafai.
Thank you, Chairman. First, Mr. Jeremy Tam called me filibustering. I've never mentioned that word. I'm just trying to exhaust all means to block the passage of the bill by July. Now, people call us loyalists. In fact, who is the loyalist? This time, I think we have to redefine loyalist. So should all who support the government be called loyalists? But this time, I don't support the government, so this is baffling. All right, the Undersecretary said that the mainstream view he heard from the Council was support. However, at the Transport Panel of the Council in 2017, Mr. Yik Chi-ming moved the following motion. Since the government is going to introduce 600 franchised taxis without addressing the aspirations of the industry and the community, the addition of 600 franchise taxis would aggravate congestion on the roads. And there was no prior consultation with the Council and also political parties. As a result, there's criticism from different political parties of the Council and strong objection from the industry. This panel moves that the government shelve the franchise taxi plan and set up a working group with different political parties of the Council to formulate a comprehensive option for addressing the problems faced by the taxi industry. So 7 supported the motion and 5 were against. So how come Undersecretary told us that in general members of the council were supportive of your plan? Thank you, Mr. Shield, for your views. I have to stress that in my response, I didn't say that we had the support of the panel. Rather, I said that we consulted the panel and we had met with different sectors of the industry. It's true that in 2017, there was a motion moved by Mr. Yip Chi-ming passed by the panel. However, at the same panel meeting, other motions were passed as well. So it only lists out the various motions. We understand that there were views from some members that the proposal was not appropriate. So we will continue to consult stakeholders. If there are further views, they would be considered in our work. As Mr. Shiu Ka-chun said, we have the timetable mapped out for the future, and we understand that this is a challenging task. All right, you have already heard what was expressed, and you said that in general the council was supportive of your proposal. However, what you said was contradictory to what Mr. Yip Chi-ming's motion. Now, Mr. Yip Chi-ming's motion was passed. How come you could say that in general the council supported your scheme? You should say that in general members were against your plan. Well, in April 2017, 5 motions were passed at the panel meeting. The first motion was moved by Mr. Yip Chi-ming, and there was a clear objection to the scheme. And for the remaining motions, the direction was not clear. So while we were aware of Mr. Yip Chi-ming's motion, on record there was only objection from Mr. Yip Chi-ming. Well, many deputations have to make a living, and yet they are here the whole morning because the environment out there is very bad. Now, for the overcharging, unscrupulous drivers, I hate them. I cut ties with them. They should not come to appeal to me. They should be penalized. But for those law-abiding taxi drivers and taxi owner who rely on their taxi for their retirement, we should protect them. And you should also crack down on Ubers and illegal hire cars. And let me reiterate what is meant by loyalists. In this council, we support what is right and oppose what's wrong, just like you, Chairman. So please don't continue to use the label loyalists on us. Good. Order, please. Under Secretary, you should have made the speech on the motion by Mr. Yip Chi-ming right from the start, instead of saying that there was general support from the council for your proposal. Mr. Frankie Yik, well, I have challenged this proposal and opposed it many times. It's indeed true that at the relevant panel meeting there were a few motions. My motion was passed. My position has always been against the franchised taxi scheme because I don't think it is an effective way to raise taxi service standard. Given the current situation, it will only aggravate their operating difficulties. Mr. Shiu Ka-chun has clearly set out the Liberal Party's objection to the bill, and will do our very best to block the passage of the bill within this term. Thank you. The Bills Committee will allow members to speak as far as possible. However, your remarks should be relevant to the bill. While I preside over the meeting, I will allow members to express their views as far as possible. Now, I want to thank deputations and individuals for coming to give us their views this morning. If you have supplementary views or any written submissions, you're welcome to let us have them after the meeting. But you must put down your name on your submissions very clearly, and then individuals and deputations may leave now. Do we have any AOB items? If not, then the meeting is adjourned. Thank you.